What's the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? When I was serving my time as an engineer in the Merchant Navy, we used to have to clean out what are called sea chests. They're basically big filters for seawater that we would pump in to use as coolant, and if the pumps were on when we were dockside, we'd find all sorts of things like bottles, fish, crabs, etc. One day we opened up the chest, pulled out the filter, and immediately saw this shiny gold thing, which turned out to be a Rolex watch. Usually, we'd just dump out the filter, but with the mitigating circumstances, we went through it thoroughly and found a piece of a shirt with a cufflink still attached and, last but not least, a nicely rotted finger. The police ended up closing off the dock and drying it but never found anything in the end. I was working in a restaurant. Wonderful place. That night we held a charity dinner for a youth in need type of house. The guy representing the house, a worker there, was such a nice and kind man. Every teen there was only saying wonderful things about him. A good soul, who was giving everything he could for these teens. At one point, they gave a big check for the charity. I must guess an amount they rarely received. Well, under the excitement, that poor man had a cardiac arrest. Dropped there on the stage, check in hand. He couldn't be brought back. He died. Seeing this was already bad enough, but the kids everywhere in the restaurant screamed and cried for hours after, haunting. I grew up in Detroit. We were poor, and my dad was very going outside and playing until the aughts. Because of this, we never had cables and rarely were let to re-watch the same few VHS tapes we had lying around. I remember one night I felt lucky because my parents forgot I was downstairs watching and never came to check. I remember falling asleep on the couch watching TV. During the night, I awoke to a man standing over me. Large figure, bulky frame. I assumed it was my dad, and he shushed me before moving around the room. I assumed he was looking for something and just being a nice dad. The next day, my family woke up, and the front door was still open from the day before, no AC, we needed the breeze. We started to notice things missing. Dad freaked out and asked if I saw anyone. It's been 25 years, but I'm fairly sure I lied because I was scared it was my fault. Dad bought a pistol that day and sat in a wooden chair facing the front door while everyone else slept. As a kid, I thought he was just angry and wasn't sleepy. As an adult, I know he was terrified of his kids and running on very few hours a week. I was about 8 and walking in a field along brambles with my grandmother, picking blackberries and generally having a fun time. The area was walking distance from her home, so it wasn't as if we were anywhere remote. We came across a small area hidden through an archway of bushes. Inside the area and underneath an overhanging tree, really secluded and off of any kind of path, we found a shallow, dug, rectangle grave shape with black, burned marks inside on the dirt. I remember my grandmother just saying, "Okay, let's go home," and we went home. Later on, I heard my granddad confirming with my grandmother that it would have been the spot where the guy tried to burn the body of a girl who had been recently murdered in their town. The case had been solved, but the crime scene must have just been left as that hole. It was all over the news just before that, but I was too young to really know about it. I have that photo image of how creepy that hole was to see to this day in my memory. I've always had trouble sleeping through the night, so I often wake up in the middle of the night. When I was probably 16 or 17, I woke up one night, and I left my room to get a snack or some water. In the hallway I saw a figure and just dismissed it as me seeing things, so I gave it a good hard look to figure out what it was. Well, it definitely wasn't a pile of clothes or anything. It just stood there, looking at me, with its long coat and grotesquely long fingers. If you've ever seen pictures of Hatman, it was kind of like that. Freaked me out for the night, and I checked the next morning to see if there was anything in that spot slightly resembling what I saw, but there wasn't. I had figured I was just seeing things and got over it until a week later, when we were around the dinner table and my sister started describing this strange figure that she had seen the night before, and it perfectly matched the thing that I had seen a couple of nights previously. The hush that fell over the table as everyone exchanged nervous looks when I said, "Oh, yeah, that guy, you've seen him too," was deafening. My dad installed security cameras the next day, but we never saw anything. I've since gotten over it, but if that didn't creep me out for a while. I grew up somewhere very rural, no streetlights and far away from any town with them. At night it was dark. My bedroom door also never closed properly. You could latch it, but it would pop open if you pushed the door lightly. One night I woke up suddenly, without knowing why. As my mind tried to make sense of things, I looked to my left, towards the bedroom door. I could see the outline of a figure. In the tiny amount of pre-dawn light, I could just see a white shape, long dark hair hanging down and sunken eyes. I could also hear it breathing. After a few seconds of absolute mind-bending horror, where I literally felt every hair stand on end, it took a step into my room, out of the dark hallway. The hallway had no windows, so my room was slightly lighter. The change of light also changed the face slightly. I could see it more clearly. I saw that it was, in fact, my mother's face, and she was sleepwalking. She very occasionally did, and also had a lot of other sleep problems, including very vivid nightmares. She quickly left and went back to bed. Fortunately for my own sanity, I never saw her sleepwalk again. We had a neighbor who moved out and came back a year later for a visit. He brought with him his 2 kids and an Asian woman he claimed was his wife. He claimed it was the same wife he used to have and that she just lost weight and had a makeover. But we remember the wife as a really tiny woman, 5 feet 1 inch or so, with wavy bob hair. This new one was about 5 feet 6 inches with long, straight black hair and looked younger too. Even when she took off her sandals, I saw that even without sandals, she was about 5 feet 6 inches. While on vacation, he told the neighbor of his vacation home that his wife died of a brain tumor. I began to wonder where his wife really was. I think he really just sent her back to her Asian home country. But it was creepy to see him trying to pass off the new one as his wife. About 25 years ago, a few days after my cousin's wedding, a large group of us decided to go out drinking one night in Portland, Maine. We decided to walk from my aunt's house to the bar and back so no one would be driving. On the way back from the bar, we cut down a dark residential street, and there was a large guy just standing there holding a hammer. It's like 2 a.m., and there is this large guy just standing in the street holding a hammer. A few of us asked what he was doing as we walked by, but he just stood there watching us as we walked down the street. The guy never said a word. Luckily, there were 12 of us in the group because who knows what this guy was up to. He gave off some creepy Jason Voorhees vibes, that's for sure. Weird stuff has been happening in the house I'm staying in for months, starting when I was out of town for 2 weeks. When I'd wake up in the morning, after I'd come back from a trip or after I'd come home from a night out, furniture had been moved, dishes had been washed, laundry had been folded, and a host of other weird things. Always good things, and nothing was ever stolen. I went through so many different possibilities. I started sleepwalking for the first time, I have carbon monoxide poisoning, there's a ghost in the house, I'm blacking out from stress, and there's someone coming in and out of the house. I searched the house so many times for another person and never found anyone, and I was slowly going crazy trying to figure out what was happening. I honestly thought I was having a psychotic breakdown at one point. The pinnacle was when I woke up one morning and all of my trash had been taken outside, put inside the trash bins had been rolled out to the curb, and all the trash bins inside had new bags in them. Things finally started slowing down, and things weren't being moved anymore, but I was hearing what sounded like people walking on the roof above me. My friends told me it was probably just squirrels, so I waved it off. Until last Friday, when I walked upstairs at 2 a.m. and the crawl space door was wide open. I called the sheriffs, and it turned out there were homeless people living inside the walls of my house on and off for months, right next to my bedroom. They were sneaking in through a faulty door lock and window they had broken. S21 in Cambodia and the killing fields. The results of genocide, which occurred between 1975 and 1980. I visited in the early 2000s. S21 was the secret center of a network of nearly 200 prisons where people were tortured by the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot took control of the city and country and ordered anyone with an education or who wore glasses out of the cities and into rice fields, despite having no knowledge of the land. If they couldn't grow crops, they were killed or starved to death. Those that resisted were imprisoned in concentration camps, with S21 being one of the main ones. It was originally a school. A place of education and peace. It was transformed into a prison of torture. Each classroom was modified to have multiple brick cubicles built inside them, similar to maybe a gym bathroom. Each classroom housed 30 to 40 prisoners. They were not allowed to shower or use the toilet. Once a month, prisoners were hosed down through the windows. There was also a process of choosing to kill an entire family, including children and babies. I forgot the term, but basically it was the idea that if one part of a tree is diseased, it is best to cut the entire tree down, including the roots. There were 30,000 imprisoned at S21 over the period of Pol Pot's regime. One of many converted school torture camps. Men, women, children, and babies. There was a practice of using babies for target practice. There were photos of this. Of the 30,000 prisoners, there were only 12 survivors. When you visit S21, you can freely wander around the school grounds, enter the cells, and stand in the torture chambers. You could feel the death and pain from the walls. Just down the road from S21 is what is known as the killing fields. This is where tens of thousands of bodies are buried in mass graves, all of whom went through the torture camps, all of whom were victims of Pol Pot's regime. I was told buses of people were brought in on a regular basis with those who would be brought here for their execution. You were sent here to your death if you were educated, if you wore glasses, if someone in your family did, or if you resisted or refused orders. When Pol Pot was overthrown, the locals collected skulls and bones and built towers with them to honor them. Giant shrines of tens of thousands of human skulls and bones are erected there. Parts of the killing fields were still littered with bones and clothing that they wore when executed. You could see patches of dirt that the wind and rain had eroded away, with bones, clothing, and items visible in the dirt. This whole experience was one of the most humbling yet terrifying things I've seen that occurred on this planet, and I still sometimes can't believe these atrocities occurred in my lifetime. A few months ago, we were at a relative's house, and when we were going back home at 2 to 3 a.m., we saw a guy covered head to toe in blood walking, or at least trying to. He started signaling, but we didn't stop because we didn't know what to do. We immediately called the police officers and told them what we'd seen. They said to lock the doors and windows and not stop. Then they kept calling us back, asking about the exact location. They called us back over 5 times, and they never found him. Edit. A lot of people seem to think he was in a car crash, but he was exiting a building, or at least it seemed like it. There weren't cars around except parked ones. Should have said that previously, my bad. In Baghdad almost 20 years ago. I was working alone at night with a busted-up small dozer with one swinging headlight. I would get off from time to time and do shovel work. One time I noticed a bunch of eyes glowing off in the distance, like 5 or 6 sets, just staring at me. I didn't think too much about it and went on working. After a few minutes, I picked my head up again and noticed the eyes were still there, but closer. I wasn't sure if they were harmless or what, so I continued working but didn't turn my back on them. After a few more minutes, I pick my head up again, and they are gone. Sweet, now I don't have to be concerned, I thought. I worked for a few more minutes and looked up and noticed all the eyes again, but they had moved around from the first side and were behind me and close enough I could now make out what they were in the blackness with the one single swinging dim headlight. They were a pack of feral dogs, looking at me like I would make a delicious meal. They were standing on a berm I had made, maybe 4 feet high. I grabbed a big dirt clod and charged at them, yelling as I ran and tossed the cloud in their direction. They didn't flinch. Oh, I thought. So, I get back on the dozer and take off towards them with it. I get closer and start going up the berm, and only then do they start walking briskly away. However, they stopped a short distance away and stared. Luckily, shortly after, another dump truck came by, and I got a ride out of there. I was hiking a little outside of Vancouver in a densely wooded area known for having many cougars, mountain lions. I had my dog with me, who was a huge, tall thing, part Irish wolfhound and fiercely loyal. We had been hiking for about an hour and were far enough back by then that we hadn't seen anyone else in quite some time. I stopped at a log to take a short break. We'd been sitting there for about 5 minutes when my dog goes stiff, hackles up, and starts growling while staring into the dense brush. I stare into the woods but can't see anything at all. It's gone quiet, though, that kind of eerie silence the forest takes on sometimes. The dog is still growling, looking at a spot about 6 feet off the ground. I decided it's time to get out of there and take up a quick pace back the way we came. The dog lets me get a bit ahead, then stops growling and follows me. He's anxious, though, and keeps stopping to check behind us. We get about 15 minutes down the path when the dog stops again, facing the woods along the path, and barks a sharp 3 or 4 times, then resumes growling intensely. I keep moving, and he sort of stiff-legged walks a few steps, stops and growls, catches up to me, walks a few more steps growling, etc. He occasionally barks. I cannot see anything in the woods for the life of me. No movement, no animals, nothing. The whole hike back goes like that. I never see a thing. Once we reached a bridge and more people, my dog finally relaxed and stopped growling/barking, but he's still keen to get out of there. I've always assumed it was a cougar stalking us. We never went back there. My job involved screening hours of video looking for evidence of war crimes, etc., from Syria, Yemen, Gaza, Ukraine, etc. I've seen all the ISIS videos. 2 in particular stand out in my mind. 1, a public ISIS execution of a Jordanian military pilot. The guy was in an orange suit in a cage, clearly anticipating a horrible death. An ISIS terrorist went into the cage with a large canister, made the pilot kneel, doused him, and set him on fire. The really creepy thing was, as he burned to a crisp, the corpse crumpled to the ground, but a few seconds later, sat back up again vertically on the knees. The Jordanian military was so furious they rounded up all the prisoners they had in the country with connections to ISIS and executed them. 2 ISIS terrorists rounded up some people they wanted to kill, put them in a cage suspended above a pool of sulfuric acid, then lowered them in, as a camera situated under the surface of the acid recorded their deaths. I used to work with a lady that was involved in a rehab program, which allowed her to go out for a certain time. She couldn't drive or have her own cell phone, so she had a designated driver who would pick her up/drop her off at a specific time. Apparently her driver is a weirdo/groomer because he wouldn't stop bothering her and has offered her money for sex. I didn't know this until drama happened, and she vented to me. One day when I was at work, this old guy came inside desperately wanting to see her. She went hiding and told me to tell the guy to leave. Which I did. Then he tried to brute force his way but failed miserably. Then he left a message on a napkin for her and left. I did read the message, and I clearly remember it. I need an answer now. I'm offering you $1,500 to run away with me. I gave it to her. She didn't read it. A few days later, the girl quit without notice. Oh, the creepy part, he would show up around 10 a.m. at the restaurant looking for her, and I kept warning the guy to leave. He eventually stopped after a few weeks. Edit. I honestly didn't believe this would blow up, and I mentioned the guy being the groomer. I want to add she's not the only victim. Apparently there was one more girl who is a minor, and she was facing the same issue as the girl venting to me or a coworker. I don't know anything about this minor, and I wanted to clarify why I called him a groomer.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.